Where is Cleopatra the Seventh of Egypt buried? For centuries, we have been searching for her final resting place. From sunken ruins in Alexandria to temples just outside the city, today we're taking a look inside the hunt for Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. Hi there, and welcome to Inside Archaeology, a channel run by an archaeologist taking you on a journey through time, exploring the stories from our past. Today, we are digging in to the leading theories, ancient accounts, and modern discoveries in the quest to find Cleopatra's lost tomb. Unlike many of the native Egyptian pharaohs, whose eternal resting places were found and looted a long time ago, the final resting place of not only Cleopatra, but also the rest of her dynasty, the Ptolemies, has never been found, and there are many competing theories as to where they might be, as well as active archaeological missions attempting to find them. This video is sponsored by AncientCyprus.com. Cyprus, first inhabited over 12,000 years ago in the pre-ceramic Neolithic period, boasts a long and complex archaeological history. AncientCyprus.com is dedicated to fostering interest in Cypriot and Levantine archaeology and supporting archaeology communications and communicators like this channel. Their work encompasses a diverse array of projects, from developing articles on topics like early Bronze Age pottery to producing 2 billion pixel surface scans of ancient objects and creating extremely high-resolution 3D models of archaeological ceramics that allow for detailed inspection of surface damage. The organization's comprehensive goal is to document the entirety of Cypriot and broader Levantine archaeology and material culture. Feel free to check out their website, which I've said a few times and is also linked in the description, to learn more about ancient Cyprus. And thanks very much to them for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's dig in to the mystery of Cleopatra's tomb. First, a short history lesson. As all archaeologists know, context is very important. Cleopatra Theophilopter, also known as Cleopatra VII, more popularly to us, was descended from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek family which ruled Egypt for 275 years, making them the longest and last family to rule Egypt before its incorporation into the Roman Empire. Their reign of Egypt is often referred to as the Hellenistic era, and it was marked by the blending of the Greek and Egyptian cultures, including art, religion, and architecture. They ruled from their seat of Alexandria on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. The dynasty's founder is Ptolemy Soter, who is sometimes reputed to be Alexander the Great's illegitimate half-brother. He took charge of Egypt after Alexander's death and stole his body to have it mummified and stored in Memphis, the religious center of Egypt. It was later relocated to Alexandria and put in a public mausoleum called the Sema or Soma that the public could visit and which has not been found either. Some 300-ish years after Ptolemy took charge of Egypt, his descendant Cleopatra and her lover Marcus Antonius, whose name has been anglicized in modern day to Mark Antony, were defeated by Octavian, later known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, at the Battle of Actium, which is actually quite far away from Egypt. They retreated to Alexandria to regroup and attempt to prevent the takeover of Egypt, but were unsuccessful. Octavian and his troops arrived at their doorstep in the month of August in the year 30 BCE and were virtually unopposed as they invaded. The Greek historian Plutarch writes that Cleopatra had built her tomb on royal grounds and amassed much of her wealth within it. Upon Octavian's arrival in Alexandria, she locked herself inside and sent a message to Mark Antony that she had died, prompting him to make a rather messy attempt at taking his own life. He lived long enough afterward to be brought to her and was apparently hoisted through the upper story window into the mausoleum where he died in her arms, and this was because she and her attendants couldn't open the doors. It's unclear if this was a matter of they couldn't open the doors because they were too heavy, or there was a mechanism to make sure that it actually stayed closed. At some point, Cleopatra was then tricked or persuaded to leave her tomb and move back into the royal palace as a prisoner, and Octavian had every intention of taking her back to Rome to be paraded in chains during a triumph. In order not to suffer such a humiliation, she ended her life, most likely by ingesting poison. According to Roman historians, Octavian then finished her incomplete tomb and permitted her to be embalmed and buried there with Antony. Throughout history, many references have been made to this tomb, but it's worth noting that only one of these accounts, written by a man by the name of Strabo, was made by somebody who probably was an eyewitness to the events around her death. And when he writes about her, he doesn't even mention her tomb, so it's not even really that helpful of a reference anyway. All the historical records mentioning it that have survived into modern day are written by Roman sources who are very, very much biased against her and are conflicting on specific details. For example, Plutarch, who is writing 100 years after her death, makes reference to Cleopatra embracing and kissing the urn which held Antony's ashes, implying he was cremated, as this was the standard Roman tradition at the time. While Cassius Dio, who was writing 200 years after her death, says that Cleopatra and Mark Antony were embalmed together. None of these accounts includes a clear description of what the tomb looked like. There are the references to the upper story window through which Antony was hoisted, and a mention that Octavian completed the upper part of its roof, which indicate that it was, at least in some ways, an above-ground structure. A fresco from Pompeii, which most likely depicts the suicide of Cleopatra, features double doors high up on the rear wall, which could be the doors to the tomb. It's unclear if the tomb building was either entirely or only partially up above ground. Perhaps it has a subterranean element to it, but this is the extent to what we know about it from the historical sources. There's no maps, there's no paintings, there's no complete frescoes, which we have found so far, although maybe that's something that we'll come across in the future. So as you can see, we know that it existed, but we really don't know exactly what we're looking for and what it might have looked like. In terms of where it might be, Plutarch places it near a temple of Isis and remarks that its windows looked out towards the sea. Both he and Cassius Dio describe Cleopatra as moving between her palace and the tomb in her last days, implying that they were located close together. Based on this, there are two potential locations for her palace as described by the historian Strabo. In the Great Harbor at the entrance, on the right hand are the island and the tower Pharos, and on the other hand are the reefs and also the promontory Lochias, with a royal palace upon it. And on sailing into the harbor, one comes on the left to the inner royal palaces, which are continuous with those on Lochias and have groves and numerous lodges painted in various colors. Below these lies the harbor that was dug by the hand of man and is hidden from view, the private property of kings, as also Antirhodos, an isle lying off the artificial harbor, which has both a royal palace and a small harbor. The promontory of Lochias, known today as Cape Silsila, is still partially above ground, but 90% of its ancient surface has disappeared into the sea due to erosion and land subsidence. It still exists today solely because in the medieval and post-medieval periods of Egypt, there was a constant filling of this subsiding, semi-submerged narrow strip of land in an attempt to maintain it above water and protect the harbor against the action of the waves. In the middle of the 16th century, a small fortress called the Pharilion was built there, and from the late 19th century, the entire promontory has been dotted with military installations, which means archaeological work on that land is pretty much impossible. They're not going to give you a permit to do that. So instead, the focus has been on underwater archaeological survey work, which has been led by Harry Tazalas and the Hellenic Institute of Ancient and Medieval Alexandrian Studies. At depths varying from 2 to 10 meters, his team have found some 400 architectural elements of different sizes on the ocean floor. It's really hard to tell which of them are in situ from when the buildings presumably fell down into the sea, and which pieces were brought and then dumped into the sea to try and build up the promontory. The most important discoveries from here include numerous architectural remains from Greco-Roman times, including a 2.6-meter tall pylon and a 3.6-meter long architrave or threshold of an oversized door, all of which are made of red granite. Due to their size and weight and the fact that they were found at greater depths, it's thought that they lie very near to their original locations. The pylon is an architectural element usually placed at the entrance of temples. This team thinks that it may have once been part of the entrance of the temple of Isis Lochias. The Greek team also think that this threshold/architrave could have been part of the monumental door of Cleopatra's mausoleum, as it has fittings for double hinges to hold a massive door similar to those known from Macedonian tombs. I couldn't find much recent information on this project that goes past 2018, so I'm not sure if work here is still ongoing. The other contender for the site of Cleopatra's palace and adjacent tomb is the island of Antirhodos, which probably sank beneath the sea following an earthquake and tsunami in 365 CE, so roughly 400 years after Cleopatra's death. It now lies underwater near the seafront of modern Alexandria at a depth of approximately 5 meters. The island was first identified in 1996 by underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio during a geophysical survey mapping the ancient harbor. Excavations showed that the island was small and fully paved, with 3 branches leading in different directions. On the main branch, they found the remains of a relatively modest, marble-floored 3rd century BCE palace, which they think is Cleopatra's royal quarters. On another narrow branch was a small temple of Isis, which is the only one that has been definitively found in Alexandria so far. At its entrance was a life-size granite statue of a priest of Isis carrying a jar topped with an image of Osiris. A pair of granite sphinxes flanked the statue, one of which had the head of Cleopatra's father. The remains of ancient docks were found at the eastern side of the island, as well as a series of giant columns/pillars made of red granite with shattered pottery beneath them. There were more than 60 pieces of these columns, and they each measured around 1.2 meters in diameter and 7 meters in length. Ancient paintings indicate that the columns acted as a ceremonial gateway to the island, although I will say that when I was researching, I couldn't find any reliable reference to which ancient paintings they're referring to, so I don't know which ones they're talking about. Each column had a decorated crown on top, and together they created a magnificent entrance, one fit for a queen. Also on the island are the remains of a small port and dock, and an uncompleted residence Mark Antony built to mope in after he was defeated at Actium. The remains do not seem to date from later than the Ptolemaic period, which suggests that the palace would have been abandoned soon after Cleopatra's death and the absorption of Egypt into the Roman Republic. Notably, despite fitting all the historical descriptions, no sign of a mausoleum has been found here so far, but excavations are still ongoing, and if you think that land-based archaeological excavations go at a really slow pace, they have got nothing on underwater archaeology. You can follow Frank Gaudio's work on his YouTube channel, which I have linked in the description of this video. So it's not shown up at either of the palaces so far. That leads to the question of where else could the tomb be? Another hypothesis has been put forward by Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a Dominican defense lawyer turned archaeologist. She thinks that Cleopatra was buried in secret at the temple of Taposiris Magna, whose name means Great Temple of Osiris. It's located about an hour's drive west of Alexandria. Her theory is that Cleopatra built a mausoleum here for herself and Mark Antony in the temple precinct because she was venerated as the earthly manifestation of the goddess Isis. This is not unusual for Egyptian kings and queens, and therefore thinks that she would have wanted to be buried together as the incarnations of the deities, and arranged it so with her priests before her suicide to move her and Mark Antony's bodies to the secret temple tomb after Octavian left for Rome. In pursuit of this theory, Dr. Martinez has been excavating at the temple since 2005, so basically 20 years, and has made several discoveries during her work. Among them are tombs containing mummified individuals, which is unprecedented. There are no other temples in Egypt with burials inside their walls. She has interpreted this as proof that something special is going on, like the burial of a very important person. She also has found coins bearing Cleopatra's image, amulets, and a unique mask depicting a man with a cleft chin, which bears some similarity to known portraits of Mark Antony. In 2022, her team found a 1,300-meter tunnel 20 meters below the ground, whose purpose at the time was unclear. It was hinted at heavily when it was first found that it could lead to her tomb, but now when I look it up, it seems to be referred to as a water transport system or aqueduct. It certainly bears a striking resemblance to the amazing Aphtalian aqueduct that's found on the Greek island of Samos. In 2024, she found a marble bust of a woman that she has identified as Cleopatra VII, but other scholars disagree and say its facial features differ from known statues of the queen, and they think it's probably a different royal woman, either a different queen or princess. Recently, she has found evidence of structures underwater off the coast, which she thinks might belong to a corresponding temple of Osiris, and has enlisted the help of Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic wreck, to help her explore them in her latest documentary for National Geographic, named Cleopatra's Final Secret, which I will be live reacting to once it comes out in September 2025. I will say my prediction is that she hasn't found the tomb because honestly, there is no way they could keep that a secret in anticipation of releasing that information in time for a documentary. Like there is no way in my mind that if they found the tomb of Cleopatra, there would not be a sea of reporters there to film the moment that it's like opened.
Editing Rachel here. The day after I filmed this video, the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities released a statement that Dr. Martinez and Bob Ballard have found evidence of a submerged ancient port consisting of an inland harbor protected by reefs. On the seabed, they found stone and metal anchors of various sizes, and research showed that the old coastline is about 4 kilometers away from the current one. Dr. Martinez thinks that this shows the site was not only an important religious, but also trade center, and that it, and I quote, had all the conditions to be chosen for Cleopatra to be buried with Mark Antony, end quote. Ballard has built a detailed technological map showing about 6 miles of key areas, with images of the port, submerged shoreline, and other underwater structures. One feature in particular, named Salam 5, had several tall and flat rectangular stone structures. Martinez and her team plan to begin new excavations with drills and divers focusing on this feature later in September 2025. Still no sign of Cleopatra's tomb, but the story of this discovery is what's going to be covered in this latest documentary.
It can also be a bit difficult sometimes to keep up with her work, as she's not actually officially published any of her research. She doesn't have a project website, and all that I was able to find about her work is either through her social media, which is pretty light on details, or press articles and documentaries. So what might we expect to find inside the tomb? This is all assuming that there is actually anything left to find. There are some people who think that Octavian would have had Antony and Cleopatra's bodies disposed of in secret as revenge or in an attempt to erase their memory. But to me, this doesn't really seem likely. He had already won, and allowing them to be buried with respect not only pacified her loyal subjects, but also just kind of made him look good. The erasing their memory logic doesn't really hold up either when you consider that we all still know and talk about them because they were written about by his historian Strabo. And while he did destroy Mark Antony's statuary, he was actually paid off by a friend of Cleopatra's to leave her statue standing. And before everybody rushes off to get dive certified looking for her treasure, Octavian's generosity had its limits. He removed her amassed treasure from her tomb and used it to pay his troops and debts before taking the rest back to Rome to enrich its treasury and adorn its temples. This means that any tomb that we do find might not really have any treasure in it at all. If any human remains inside the tomb have managed to survive the ensuing 2,000 years, a couple of earthquakes, and potential submersion into the sea, which, as a bone specialist, I have to say that's highly unlikely, the first thing we would need to do is definitively identify them. After all, Cleopatra's handmaidens who died might have been buried alongside her and Mark Antony, alongside other members of their family. Thankfully, due to recent technological advances in ancient DNA and stable isotope analysis, it is actually probably possible to identify them beyond just like radiocarbon dating to be able to say that they are roughly contemporary with the time period that we're looking for. Looking at stable isotopes, I would hope to be able to see that Mark Antony grew up in Rome, but spent significant amounts of time living and eating elsewhere, as well as having a Roman DNA lineage. Cleopatra's bones would hopefully show that she grew up in Egypt but had Greek ancestry, as well as settling the question once and for all as to whether she had only Greek ancestry and was therefore very inbred. You can watch my video on the Forgotten Cleopatras if you want to learn more about that, or if she had DNA from somewhere else outside the family, like native Egyptian DNA, which would help settle a lot of questions about who her mother was. You might even be able to see markers on her DNA to indicate her general skin and hair and eye color. Work to find the tomb is ongoing, and hopefully one of these projects that I've mentioned, or another one, will eventually be successful in finding it. It would undoubtedly be one of the most amazing archaeological finds ever made, like up there with King Tut. But even if they don't find Cleopatra's tomb, these projects have contributed significantly to our understanding of the port of Alexandria and the temple of Taposiris Magna. So either way, it's still a win for archaeology. Only one thing is certain. Until it is found, the mystery of Cleopatra's tomb will continue to fascinate the world. Where do you think it is? Share your theory in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more. If you're feeling extra generous, you can give me a super thanks, Ko-fi donation, or purchase some merch from my Redbubble shop. There's links to all of this in the description. Taking a few seconds to support me in any way that you can helps grow the channel and promotes quality heritage content that is well sourced, researched, and presented by somebody who is an expert in this subject. It shows the algorithm that people are interested in learning about real archaeology, not pseudoscience or clickbait AI. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure inside archaeology.